Haunting of Chillingham Castle. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The moon hung low over the countryside, casting eerie shadows along the winding road leading to Chillingham Castle. The castle loomed ahead, its towering stone walls bathed in an ominous glow beneath the silver light. The team of paranormal investigators, consisting of 5 members, Lisa, Mark, Sarah, Daniel, and Tom, stepped out of their van, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid night air. As they passed through the heavy iron gates, an unsettling silence blanketed the area. The wind, which had howled the entire drive, had inexplicably died down, leaving only the sound of their footsteps echoing off the gravel path. The castle seemed to be waiting, watching. Lisa shuddered, brushing off the uneasy feeling as a trick of her imagination. Tom, the group's leader, carried a handheld camera, recording every moment. "All right, team, this is where countless ghost sightings have been reported. Tonight, we find out what's real and what's legend." The large oak doors groaned as Daniel pushed them open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of aged wood. The grand hall stretched before them, dimly illuminated by flickering candle sconces. Portraits of long-dead lords and ladies lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow the intruders. Mark exhaled sharply. "Something's not right. It feels heavy in here." Sarah nodded, gripping her EMF detector. "Let's set up base camp in the main hall and start our investigation." Unbeknownst to them, the castle had already welcomed them in its own sinister way. Their arrival had awakened something that had long lain dormant, watching, waiting. Chapter 2. The Blue Boy's Cry. The team wasted no time setting up their equipment. Cameras, motion sensors, and audio recorders were placed strategically around the castle. As midnight approached, the air inside grew unnaturally cold, and a thick fog rolled in through the open windows, curling around their feet. Then it happened. A distant, mournful wail echoed through the stone corridors. A child's cry, sorrowful and filled with despair. Lisa's blood ran cold. "Did you hear that?" The sound seemed to come from the upper floors. The team exchanged nervous glances before cautiously making their way toward the source. As they climbed the spiraling stone staircase, the wailing intensified, followed by soft, desperate whispers. "Help me! Please!" They entered a chamber where the temperature dropped drastically. The walls were covered in faded blue wallpaper, and an old, four-poster bed stood in the corner, its canopy draped in cobwebs. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. Then, in the dim candlelight, a faint blue glow flickered near the bed. The ghostly outline of a young boy materialized, his translucent form riddled with sorrow. His hollow eyes locked onto Lisa's as his lips quivered. "They buried me inside the walls." Before anyone could react, the walls began to tremble, and the tormented screams of a child erupted around them. The room filled with an unearthly force, pushing them back as the boy's form twisted in agony before vanishing into the darkness. Lisa clutched her chest, gasping. "He's trying to tell us something." But the walls of Chillingham Castle had held their secrets for centuries, and they weren't about to reveal them easily. Chapter 3: Lady Mary's Lament. The team barely had time to recover from the encounter before another disturbance sent chills down their spines. As Lisa turned to leave the Blue Boy's room, a soft rustling sound caught her attention. The noise was faint, like silk brushing against the cold stone floor. Sarah froze. "Do you hear that?" The sound grew louder, and with it came a scent. Floral yet decayed, like roses left too long in a damp cellar. The group turned toward the corridor outside, where shadows flickered unnaturally against the dim candlelight. The hallway stretched long and empty, but the air carried an unmistakable presence. Mark, gripping his camera, whispered, "Who's there?" A deep sorrow filled the air, thick and suffocating. A figure emerged from the darkness. A woman, her face pale as moonlight, her eyes hollow with despair. Her elegant gown trailed behind her, the delicate fabric moving as if caught in a breeze none of them could feel. Lisa's throat went dry. "It's her, Lady Mary Berkeley." Lady Mary's face contorted with grief, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak but couldn't. The air grew heavy, and suddenly an invisible force shoved Sarah against the wall. She gasped, her breath leaving her in a choked cry. Tom lunged forward to grab her, but before he could, Lady Mary's ghost let out a heart-wrenching wail, the sorrow in her voice so intense that it rattled through their bones. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. Sarah slumped to the floor, her hands shaking. She was in pain. It wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. The hallway was silent again, but the investigators knew one thing for certain. The ghost of Lady Mary Berkeley was still searching, still suffering, still bound to the place where she had been abandoned. Chapter 4: The Dungeon of Despair. Just around to 3, the team decided to explore the dungeon where the most gruesome tales of torture had originated. Mark led the way, his camera light casting eerie shadows along the damp stone walls. Chains still hung from rusted hooks, and deep scratch marks lined the floor, evidence of prisoners who had tried and failed to escape their fate. Mark explained that prisoners who had tried and failed to escape their fate, as they moved deeper inside, an oppressive force weighed on them, like 1,000 unseen eyes glaring from the darkness. Sarah shivered. "I don't like this. It feels angry." Tom knelt beside an ancient wooden rack, its splintered surface stained dark. This place saw centuries of suffering. The temperature plummeted. A guttural whisper drifted from the shadows. "Leave." Then, without warning, the chains along the walls began to rattle violently. A blood-curdling scream erupted from nowhere, filling the chamber with raw agony. Mark staggered back, his camera shaking. The sound wasn't just an echo of the past. It was here, happening now. A shadowy figure loomed in the far corner, barely distinguishable from the darkness. Its twisted form writhed unnaturally, its eyes burning with malice. The ghost of John Sage, the torturer, had awoken, and he was not pleased with their intrusion. The investigators barely had time to react before the air was filled with the scent of burning flesh, and unseen hands reached out from the shadows, clawing at their clothes. The dungeon had claimed countless victims before, and it was hungry for more. Chapter 5: The Blood-Stained Corridor. The team stumbled out of the dungeon, their breaths ragged, their nerves frayed. The air in the corridor was thick with the metallic scent of blood, though no visible source could be found. The stone floor beneath them seemed damp, slick, an illusion, they hoped, rather than the remnants of centuries-old suffering. Mark wiped his forehead. "We need to get out of here. This isn't residual energy. This is something active." Lisa pointed down the long arched hallway. "Then why does it feel like we're being watched?" A dim red glow flickered at the far end of the corridor, casting elongated shadows against the ancient walls. As they edged closer, the glow intensified, revealing something far worse than they had anticipated. Bodies, or at least the specters of them, hanging from rusted chains, their faces frozen in agony, their spectral forms writhing as if still in the throes of unspeakable torture. Their mouths hung open, though no sound escaped save for the suffocating air of despair. Sarah clamped a hand over her mouth, bile rising in her throat. "This can't be real." One of the spectral figures suddenly jerked its head toward them, its hollow eye sockets burning with a ghostly crimson light. A gurgling whisper clawed through the silence. "Join us." A violent force shot through the hallway. The walls trembled, and blood, thick, viscous, and pungent, began seeping from the cracks in the stone. It ran like veins of torment, painting the walls with the suffering of those long forgotten. The temperature dropped sharply as a wail of anguish filled the space. Tom grabbed Lisa's wrist, yanking her back just as the blood began to pool around their feet. "Run!" The team sprinted through the corridor, the sound of rattling chains and guttural screams echoing behind them. Just as they reached the heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. They were trapped. A whisper slithered through the darkness. "No one leaves the blood-stained corridor." Then, a cold hand brushed against Mark's neck, sending him into a blind panic. Sarah fumbled for the EMF meter, but the device exploded in her hand, sending shards of plastic flying. The entity, whatever it was, didn't want to be measured. It wanted to consume. A chilling wind swirled around them, pulling them backward as the ghostly prisoners stretched their spectral hands forward. The team had only seconds before the corridor would claim them as its own. Chapter 6: The Feast of Shadows. With every ounce of strength, Daniel threw himself against the door, his shoulder crashing into the aged wood. The moment his weight hit it, the entire structure gave way, sending them tumbling into the grand banquet hall. The hall was untouched by time. Candles burned in their sconces, their flames flickering with unnatural grace. The grand table stretched the length of the room, its surface covered in extravagant platters of rotted food and goblets filled with dark, viscous liquid. Lisa scrambled to her feet, her gaze locking onto the figures seated at the table. Decayed, eyeless corpses dressed in lavish medieval garments sat stiffly in their chairs, their skeletal fingers curled around silverware. "Oh my God," Sarah whimpered. Then, as if triggered by their presence, the corpses began to move. Their jaws cracked open, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth. They turned their eyeless sockets toward the intruders, their gaping mouths releasing a guttural, otherworldly growl. "They were waiting for us," Mark whispered, terror thick in his voice. Suddenly, the doors behind them slammed shut. The air grew heavy, pressing against their chests, suffocating them. The candlelight dimmed as an oppressive darkness slithered from the corners of the room, coalescing into a single towering figure at the head of the table. A man, or what was left of him, draped in royal robes, his decayed flesh stretched tight over his bones, slowly rose from his seat. A golden crown, tarnished with blood, sat upon his half-missing skull. His jaw unhinged as he spoke in a voice that was not entirely human. "You have disturbed the Feast of Shadows. Now you must partake." The corpse royalty raised a goblet, and instantly the rotted food began to writhe with life. Maggots spilling onto the table, chunks of flesh rearranging themselves into grotesque, moving shapes. The goblets bled over, the liquid hissing as it touched the silver.